Hello and welcome back to Retro Muscle. Here's part 2 of the Keith Klein interview from Muscle Media 2000. Enjoy.
Let's go back a little bit more to food. We were talking about protein. What about like protein sources? You mentioned, the obvious, the chicken and the turkey. What are those the best amino acid profiles as far as whole foods?
Well, yeah, that and egg whites.
Egg whites, okay.
Beans, people who are vegetarian, if you notice one thing about vegetarians, they're very thin people, but they're very soft-looking people. They lack muscle density and tone because the amino acid profile within vegetable sources is not anywhere near as high in quality as that from animal sources. So when we see people who are pure vegetarians, they often lack muscle density and tone. So we want to really make sure as bodybuilders or as athletes that want to possess muscle density and tone, we want to make sure that we get a high-quality source of protein, and those are from the kind that I mentioned. As we're talking about protein, let me tell you something else that's rather interesting. I have seen over the course of years a number of long-distance runners who eat predominantly carbohydrates because that's what they've been told is their source of fuel. Most of these long-distance runners, not only are they thin and flabby, a lot of them have a roll around the center of their waist, particularly the men.
That's right, yeah.
Okay, well, the reason for this is because they're not eating enough protein. The moment I put protein into their diet, not only does their energy, endurance, and stamina and their race times improve, their percentage of body fat drops so dramatically and that little roll around their waist disappears. It's amazing what such an unbalanced eating program could do, although they're very healthy foods, what an unbalanced eating program like that would do to a person working out. So that's why we have to understand that every sport requires a different balance.
So is it that it's the improper balance, or that the role of carbohydrates has been, blown up way out of proportion? It's
a combination. Obviously, if it's unbalanced, then the carbohydrates are way too high. You got a diet there of a guy who's eating carbohydrates somewhere around 85% of his calories coming from carbs with about 10% protein. There's no way he could have an optimal performance level like he could if we balanced out his meals. In fact, I saw one of those today, in fact. So it's rather dramatic.
Okay. You're also known as somewhat of a consumer advocate as far as foods.
Yeah, I'm really enjoying that.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Plus, a lot of your columns in Muscle Media have been about that. Yeah, you get a lot of trouble for that, legal-wise.
Yeah, it's funny. In fact, this is really almost too humorous. The article that I believe will be coming out, you could probably tell me better. When is it? Is it the next issue or the issue after that on Buffalo?
Oh, the one we're working on right now. It'll be out in, first week of July, I believe.
Okay, well, they'll get the scoop ahead of time. I went ahead to a butcher shop here in Houston that was selling ground buffalo meat. There's a lot of rhetoric all through Texas and the southern states that buffalo is a very low-fat meat.
Right, I think I even wrote about it once, yeah.
Okay, well, yeah, and parts of it may be lean. But in this particular butcher shop I went into, they had pamphlets that were advertising the buffalo meat to be 7% fat. And now you and I know, honestly, you can't have a red muscle fiber be 7% fat. It's physiologically impossible. But when they found out I was a nutritionist, they just started just giving me all kinds of information and telling me how great the stuff was. So what I did is I took 6 sub-samples of their ground round buffalo. They told me it was the ground round. Their buffalo patties, and sent it off to an FDA-approved lab, and the lab results came back and showed it was 49% fat.
Whoa.
That's a big cry from 7%.
My God, yeah.
Yeah. Now, what happened then, inadvertently, is the magazine that I write for here locally, one of the individuals that worked at the magazine had inadvertently faxed the article with the lab results to the butcher shop without my knowledge or consent. And the gentleman at the butcher shop proceeded to fax it to the various buffalo entities in America, of which I didn't even know there were any, okay? And my telephone, well, first of all, my fax machine was going crazy with letters from these folks condemning the article. And I got a phone call from the president of the National Buffalo Association threatening to sue me if that article was published. Her exact words were, "We will take you to court if you publish this article." And the reason that they were saying that was because they didn't feel that the one subsample I took represented the entire buffalo industry. But see, then I said to them, well, look, Obviously, your one subsample, which you based the 7% fat round buffalo burger on, because, see, they had all kinds of literature which stated that, obviously their one subsample didn't represent the entire buffalo industry either.
Right, yeah.
So, yeah, I get phone calls and fax. In fact, I received a phone call from a person that owns a buffalo restaurant in Texas. And what they were telling me is, why didn't you differentiate between water buffalo and American bison?
Oh, my God.
And I'm like, well, why would I didn't know this. We serve water buffalo. We don't serve American bison, you know. So I don't know what the difference between them is. I just did what I found.
Well, that makes me think of, I mean, if you found that true to be of a buffalo, that could be true of any meat or any poultry or any fish almost, couldn't it?
Well, let's face it, TC. Here's something rather interesting that I don't think many people think about. Too many people place a great amount of weight in the USDA's results, but those are also based on a random sample. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't necessarily always reflect what we as consumers may be purchasing, because various vendors, meat vendors and wholesalers, can do a variety of things to their meats to alter them. We can go into a butcher shop who says it's ground round and it's really not. We can go out to get one chicken that was a whole lot fatter than another. So no matter where you go in testing a food, you're always going to see variables. They're always just naturally built in.
So what would you recommend? Just, roll the dice and, I mean, we can't stop eating. I mean,
well, no, let's face it. We know chicken breast and turkey breast are lean choices so long as you remove the skin.
Okay.
But we don't know how lean buffalo is, because there's a big difference between being range-fed versus wild. And the range-fed is the key here, because they want to fatten them up, because the more the meat weighs, the more money they make. So it stands to reason that certain entities will stand to make more profits and benefit by a higher fat product. But that doesn't necessarily mean that what they're selling us is exactly what the USDA might have tested.
Now, what about things like fish? I'll read in one book that a certain type of fish has only, X number of grams of fat, and I'll read somewhere else that it has twice that.
Right.
I mean, what is that all about?
Well, that a lot of times can reflect the time of year of which it was caught, because we do know that some fish are migratory fish, and I think I wrote an article for Muscle Media about the tuna fish. Mm-hmm. Where we had one can of water-packed Star-Kiss tuna that was 45% fat, and another can with the identical label, water-packed also, was 12% fat. And here, what was going on here is it reflected the different times of year. As tuna are migratory fish, prior to the migration, they'll feed so heavily they'll triple their body weight in fat. And when caught during the beginning of the migration, they're a high-fat fish. But they don't feed at all during the migration, so when caught mid-migration, they're a medium-fat fish, and when caught at the end of the migration, they're a low-fat fish. But not all fish are migratory fish. So you see, we can basically say that there are certain fish we know are generally always going to be low-fat. Take, your red snapper, or your cod, or your haddock, or your halibut, or your shrimp, or your scallops. We know all those are going to be low-fat. Take your tuna, or sometimes like we see orange roughy, sometimes getting a very high percentage of fat and sometimes getting a low. And so maybe we can assume, again, it's the time of year that it might have been caught.
Wow, so we should just stick with the safe bets then.
Yeah, I think so, if we want to be sure. The only other way to know for sure, TC, is to have a lab analyze it, and that's pretty expensive.
Yeah, really. Because it would come back kind of rotten from the lab.
That's right.
Now, you mentioned lunch meats earlier.
Yeah.
Now, what's wrong with lunch meats?
I'm really a big advocate against lunch meats, because most of the companies, not only do they employ a lot of deceptive practices on their labeling, they often don't. They have a very inferior product to the very meats that we could have cooked and grilled ourselves. So I see a lot of sodium, I see a lot of fat, and I see a lot of deceptive comments made on the covers of these things. And by the way, the new label laws will do nothing to clear these things up. I have a book slated out for the end of this year called Eat, Think, and Be Leery, and it's about the new label laws and how deceptive they really are. And I think that when the new label laws finally do hit, and I've been saying this for well over a year and a half now, people are going to be very discouraged, because most Americans are going to look at the new label and not only be confused, they'll be choosing foods based on what the new label says, thinking they're eating low fat when in fact they're really eating high fat. And according to the new label laws, you are allowed to tell people that a can of oil, vegetable oil, has no fat in it.
How's that? What? How's that?
Okay, I'll challenge you to go into your supermarket and get any of the new cooking sprays with the new label on it.
Uh-huh.
And like I'm holding right now, because I'm in my office, a can of Weight Watchers cooking spray canola oil. When you turn it over on Nutrition Facts, it says that the calories from fat are 0, the grams of fat are 0, and the percent of the daily value fat is 0, and the first ingredient is canola oil. Okay, how can they do that?
Magic.
How can they do it? It's magic. That's right. It's based on the serving size. You see, by law, if a food has a half a gram of fat or less, they can say it has no fat at all. And now what that does is if you sprayed a cooking spray for 1/3 of a second, you'll have less than a half a gram of fat. But see, I took 10 people. I know you're going to think I need to get a life because some of the food studies are like that, okay? But I took 10 people. We all had a can of the spray. I had a stopwatch, and I had them spray a 6-inch Teflon pan. And the average spraying time was 3 seconds. And yet, by the new laws, the FDA has decided that a serving of this cooking spray is 1/3 of a second spray. No one sprays it for 1/3 of a second.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
So therefore, it can say 0 fat, but it is a can of oil.
Jeez.
Okay?
Now, well, how should we read these labels then? What should we look for?
Well, the point being is that when we're going to introduce a new food into our diet, we don't just look at the grams of fat, but we also look at other components of the food, like the list of ingredients, to make sure that it does indeed fit into our program. For example, I think that these sprays are a fine thing to use. I think you have to spray this for 15 seconds to get a tablespoon of oil, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Now, most of us won't spray it for 15 seconds, and this is a fine product to use. But you see, the deception is that there's going to be many people who think these cans of oil have no fat in it, so therefore they're much more likely to use more of it now. See what I'm saying?
Yeah, right.
If you think there's no fat in it, you aren't going to stop at 1/3 of a spray. You're going to go ahead and spray it all you want.
Sure.
So you see, the deception lies in the serving sizes, but if people are a little bit more informed and can turn to the list of ingredients, I think they'll be a little bit better informed on what choices and how much of it to use. Another thing, did you know the new laws, by law, they have to list the grams of sugar on the label?
Yeah, I've seen that, right.
Okay, well, that's good, because when I would send a food off, I sent Slim Fast off to the lab to have it analyzed. Mm-hmm. And to get the sugar profile on the Slim Fast, it cost me a little over $100. Well, now that the grams of sugar have to be listed on the label, what's great about that is I don't have to do that anymore. It saves me some money.
Right.
However, I find it rather interesting that the new label laws, the FDA chose to list the sugars in a metric measurement that no one can relate to, rather than a household measurement like teaspoons that we can all understand.
Yeah.
For example, if it says 39, I'm going to pull out a can of Coke that has the new label Coca-Cola, okay?
Okay.
And on the label it says it has 39 grams of sugar. Well, see, most Americans will look at that and they don't know how many teaspoons that is.
Right.
Okay, now, see, when I work with people, I'm going to teach them how to convert that into teaspoons. And when you look at that grams of sugar, what you do is you just divide it by 4. And the reason we use 4 is because 1 teaspoon contains 4 grams. Well, if I look at those grams of sugar, it says 39, and I divide it by 4, that means there are 9 3/4 teaspoons of sugar in 1 can of Coke. Okay? Suddenly, when I can look at the food that way, I'm looking at it through a different perspective. See, a lot of times people are so caught up, and there's a proliferation of fat-free foods on the market today that are indeed fat-free, but that contain so much sugar, it would stop them from getting lean too. And so if I could show people how to convert the grams into teaspoons, they become more informed consumers and can decide for themselves whether or not that fits into their program. My recommendation to my clients is to try to keep those grams of simple sugars down below 40 a day. Okay?
Yeah.
Let me say one other thing about sugar. Let me tell you, the FDA doesn't think much about loopholes. I'll tell you right now what the first loophole would be on the sugar thing. And see, that's what this book is about. It's about exposing these things and saying, look, here's what companies will start to do. If you had a cookie, TC, that you wanted to sell, and it was 100% sugar, and you didn't want anybody to know that there was any sugar in it because the new label says you had to list grams of sugar on there, I can tell you right now the new loophole would be this. If you came to me and said, Keith, how can I make a cookie that shows 0 grams of sugar on the label, although it's 100% sugar, could I do that? I could tell you you can. If we made your product from long-chain corn syrup, it would show no simple sugars, but yet as soon as you eat that cookie and the long-chain corn syrup hits your stomach acid, it immediately disperses into a simple sugar. You see, so there's already loopholes built into the laws.
Okay, I mean, realistically, what's wrong with eating a certain amount of sugar?
There's nothing wrong with a small, little bits of sugar. We need them, okay? So we need them as a source of fuel. But what the problem is people, when they're seeing fat-free, they're thinking that it's a free food. And they often don't realize that at one time they can be eating upwards of around 10, 12, 15 teaspoons of sugar.
Yeah.
And if you put that in a bowl in front of you, you would never, sit there and spoon-feed yourself that much sugar. We know simple sugars can rapidly be converted into fat. For bodybuilders that get ready for shows, I cut out all simple sugars 8 weeks out from their show.
Now, would that include fructose and things like that?
Oh, yeah. We don't differentiate between those sugars, by the way.
Okay.
To us, they're all simple, and they will tend to keep your skin a little thicker. The reason why, I think, look at how many pro bodybuilders are coming, or great bodybuilders come out of Houston. And you'll notice that most of them are clients of mine, not because of me, but because of the way that we approach things and the information that we have about how to peak, I think is so far advanced over where everybody else is. You see, when these guys walk into shows, most all of them peak invariably at every show. And you'll also notice their skin has a very thin appearance. And we attribute that to the types of foods, balance of foods, and, the constant monitoring of the body composition. But simple sugars would tend to smooth that out and stop them from getting that real thin-skinned appearance. So no fruit, no wheat, no pasta, no bagels, no bread.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is the end of side 1. Please fast forward.
All right, everybody. That was part 2 of the Keith Klein interview. I hope you enjoyed it. There's much more to come from this audio series, so stay tuned. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and also check out my Instagram page, Retro Muscle Mags. See you next time.